As the 2024 presidential election approaches, the economy stands as a pivotal issue for millions of Americans. According to a June 2024 poll by Morning Consult, 77% of voters deemed the economy a very important factor in deciding their vote. This focus on economic health is not new. For decades, the U.S. economy has been a central concern in elections, with key indicators such as inflation, unemployment, national debt, poverty, and income inequality all contributing to the broader picture of economic prosperity. The gross domestic product, GDP, is perhaps the most comprehensive measure of economic health, reflecting the total monetary value of all goods and services produced in the U.S. Economic growth, indicated by a rising GDP, typically brings increased consumer spending, higher corporate revenues, better wages, and more employment opportunities. Conversely, a declining GDP signals economic contraction, often accompanied by rising unemployment and falling wages. While many factors influence the economy, the fiscal policies set by the U.S. president play a significant role. Over the years, various presidents have had different levels of success in growing the U.S. economy, with some overseeing periods of significant economic expansion and others less so. But how much can a president truly influence the economy, and are they justly credited or blamed for its performance? The 2024 presidential election looms near, and for millions of Americans, the state of the economy is a critical concern. A recent poll conducted in June 2024 by Morning Consult highlights that 77% of voters regard the economy as a very important factor in deciding who to support on Election Day. This in economic issues is a long-standing trend, with the U.S. economy consistently being a primary issue for American voters in elections over the past 50 years. Several key metrics are often used to assess economic health, including inflation, the unemployment rate, national debt, poverty rate, and income inequality. Among these, the gross domestic product, GDP, is widely considered the most comprehensive measure. GDP represents the total monetary value of all goods and services produced in the United States. When the economy expands, as indicated by rising GDP figures, consumer spending, corporate revenue, worker wages, and employment typically increase. Conversely, a decline in GDP usually signals an economic contraction characterized by rising unemployment, reduced output, and falling wages. Changes in GDP are closely monitored by lawmakers, investors, and employers, and they have real-world impacts on millions of Americans. American fiscal policy, which encompasses federal tax rates and spending priorities, significantly influences the trajectory of the economy. Among policymakers, the U.S. president arguably holds the most sway over fiscal policy. While GDP is also affected by various macroeconomic factors beyond the control of any single individual or entity, presidents are often credited or blamed for the state of the economy. This attribution can significantly impact their political legacy and voter support. Using data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, 24/7 Wall Saint identified the presidents who oversaw the most significant economic growth. They ranked every president since 1930 based on the average annual change in GDP during their time in office. These growth rates were calculated using GDP figures from each president's first full year in office to their final year, with adjustments made for inflation using real annual GDP figures chained to 2017 dollars. Among the 16 presidents who have served since 1930, average annual GDP growth rates have ranged from a decline of 7.3% to an increase of 12.2%. Of the 5 highest-ranking presidents in terms of GDP growth, 4 were Democrats and 1 was a Republican. Conversely, among the 5 lowest-ranking presidents, 3 were Republicans and 2 were Democrats. Ronald Reagan, the highest-ranking Republican on this list, managed an economic recession early in his administration by cutting taxes and reducing government spending to stimulate growth. In stark contrast, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the highest-ranking Democrat, led during the Great Depression and World War II with economic growth under his administration, driven largely by a surge in government spending to fund New Deal programs and the war effort. Herbert Hoover, who served as the 31st president from 1929 to 1933, witnessed the onset of the Great Depression. His administration saw an average annual GDP decline of 7.3%, with the total GDP falling by 19.5% during his tenure. This significant contraction in the economy was marked by skyrocketing unemployment rates and widespread poverty. George W. Bush, the 43-year president, served from 2001 to 2009. His administration experienced an average annual GDP growth of 1.8%. The total GDP increased by 13% over his 2 terms, despite facing significant economic challenges, including the 2008 financial crisis, which led to a severe recession. George H. W. Bush, George H. W. Bush, the 41st president, served from 1989 to 1993. During his administration, the average annual GDP growth was 2.0%. The total GDP grew by 6.3%, reflecting a period of moderate economic expansion despite facing a recession in the early 1990s. Harry S. Truman, who took office following Franklin D. Roosevelt's death in 1945, served until 1953. Truman's administration saw an average annual GDP growth of 2.0%, with the total GDP increasing by 31%. This period included the post-World War II economic boom and the beginning of the Korean War. Joseph R. Biden Jr. The current president as of 2024, has seen an average annual GDP growth of 2.2% during his administration from 2021 to 2023. The total GDP increased by 2.5%, reflecting the economy's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent economic policies aimed at stimulating growth. Donald J. Trump, the 45th president, served from 2017 to 2021. His administration experienced an average annual GDP growth of 2.3%, with the total GDP increasing by 6.0%. Trump's tenure included tax cuts and deregulation efforts aimed at stimulating economic growth, though the COVID-19 pandemic significantly impacted the economy in 2020. Barack Obama, who served as the 44th president from 2009 to 2017, oversaw an average annual GDP growth of 2.3%. The total GDP increased by 16.8% during his 2 terms. Obama's administration faced the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis and implemented policies to stabilize and grow the economy. Jimmy Carter, the 39th president, served from 1977 to 1981. His administration saw an average annual GDP growth of 2.7%. The total GDP increased by 5.5%, reflecting moderate economic growth amidst high inflation and energy crises. Richard M. Nixon. Richard M. Nixon, who served as the 37th president from 1969 to 1974, experienced an average annual GDP growth of 2.8%. The total GDP grew by 14.2%, despite facing economic challenges such as inflation and the 1973 oil crisis. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th president, served from 1953 to 1961. His administration saw an average annual GDP growth of 2.8%, with the total GDP increasing by 24.7%. Eisenhower's tenure included significant infrastructure projects and moderate economic growth. Gerald R. Ford. Gerald R. Ford, who became the 38th president after Nixon's resignation, served from 1974 to 1977. His administration experienced an average annual GDP growth of 3.3%, with the total GDP increasing by 10.3%. Ford faced economic challenges such as high inflation and unemployment. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, the 40th president, served from 1981 to 1989. His administration saw an average annual GDP growth of 3.6%. The total GDP increased by 35.1% during his two terms. Reagan implemented significant tax cuts and deregulation policies, leading to a period of substantial economic growth. William J. Clinton. William J. Clinton, the 42nd president, served from 1993 to 2001. His administration experienced an average annual GDP growth of 3.7%, with the total GDP increasing by 28.0%. Clinton's tenure included a period of robust economic expansion marked by technological advancements and low unemployment. Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson, who served as the 36th president from 1963 to 1969, saw an average annual GDP growth of 4.9%. The total GDP increased by 26.2% during his time in office. Johnson's administration focused on social programs and civil rights initiatives, contributing to economic growth. John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, the 35th president, served from 1961 until his assassination in 1963. His administration experienced an average annual GDP growth of 5.2%, with the total GDP increasing by 4.4%. Kennedy's policies aimed at stimulating economic growth and addressing social issues. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt, who served as the 32nd president from 1933 to 1945, oversaw the highest average annual GDP growth of 9.3%. The total GDP increased by 157.2% during his time in office. Roosevelt's New Deal programs and World War II efforts significantly boosted economic growth and helped lift the country out of the Great Depression. As we approach the 2024 election, it is clear that economic policy and leadership play crucial roles in shaping the nation's economic trajectory. Presidents from both parties have led through periods of significant economic growth and challenges. But how much of the economy's performance can truly be attributed to the president's policies, and how much is influenced by external factors beyond their control? Share your thoughts on the impact of presidential leadership on the economy and what factors you believe are most important in driving economic growth.